Hello class. Okay, so in this video we are going to broadcast our message to our other user that we are chatting with. And like when you send a message here, this message is going to be shown on our front end, of course, but also we are going to send it to our other user, for example in this chat. So but before we do that, let's also, I noticed that these message bodies, they're stretched into full width while they only have a short text. So let's fix that. Okay, so let's go back to our Visual Studio. In here, open the Chatbox.blade so we can add a few styles to the message body element. Width, make it 80%, max minus width at 80%, and then max minus width again. Make this max minus content. So this way our chat will now look more pretty like that. You see, so our message is only stretching when it needs to. We can now proceed after fixing that. So first we are going to go back to our Visual Studio, and then in here we're going to create an event. Right, if you can see on top here, we don't have any event folders here, and we're going to create that by opening our terminal. In here we are going to, let's open the one which is not currently on the server, a new one. Alright, so here we're going to type an artisan command, php artisan make event. Let's call this message sent. Just make sure the M and the S is capital, message sent. Alright, so let's click that. Our event has been created, and if you can see up here we have this folder, this new folder and file that has been created here. So in this message sent event, we're gonna now configure it. So in here you must type this implement. Don't forget this, guys, very important. Implement should broadcast. While we're in here, let's just add everything. We can just delete that. In here, just add public user, public message, public conversation, public receiver ID. And then in the constructor here, we're now going to add all these in here. Just type, let's get the user model, user, add a comma. Here, pass the message. Alright, in here, let's pass the conversation. And then there, let's pass the receiver ID. Right now, let's now name these. Alright, this user will be equals to user. This message will be equals to message. Again, this conversation will be equals to conversation. Last one, this receiver will be equals to receiver ID. So I realize that we gotta inject all this with the model. So here let's add a message model. In here let's add a conversation model. In here let's add a user again, user model. So let's change this from ID to just receiver. In here change it to receiver, and in here change it to receiver. In here change it to receiver. Alright, so now everything is set. So now let's choose the actual information that we're going to allow this event to share to our other user, because we can't share everything. So here just write a public function. Name this one broadcast with. Make sure it's as is broadcast with, because it's a convention. It's a reserved function for Laravel. So make sure it's broadcast with. Make sure the name is correct. In here we're not gonna pass any parameters. In here what we're gonna broadcast is return. Add an array for that. Alright, now this is going to be user will be equals to this user ID. Alright, this user ID, this one here. Add a comma there, and now here make sure it's user ID. Alright, next here add a colon, comma here. Message, this message. I'm gonna pass the whole message model here. Make sure it's a comma. Actually, we can just get the ID, message ID. Alright, and then here next, conversation ID, this conversation ID. Alright, make sure it's a comma there. Last one is receiver. Make sure it's underscore ID, this receiver ID. So we're only passing IDs on everything. We're gonna call them back. So now we are going to, here if you can see on the bottom we have this broadcast on. Now this is where we're going to declare our logic for our channel. You can have public channels. If it's a public channel, it will just be like channel like that. And the public channel is mostly for notifications, or you want to show an online presence, it's available to everyone. But since this is a private, we're sending a message which is secret, we're going to use a private channel. So here the channel name is going to be, okay, let's make this chat. All right, chat. And in here we're gonna, like, since this is the gate, it's like we're sending an ID to fact check. Like if the ID that we're gonna send in this channel is the same as the logged in user, we're gonna pass a user ID here. So inside this bracket after chat, just write dot, and make sure I follow this correct because it's gonna give you an error if you make a mistake. And outside it, just add another dot and type this. Here we're gonna get receiver ID. Alright, and remove that semicolon inside. So this is gonna send this ID to our channel, to our gate, to check if this receiver ID is actually the one that we're gonna use. So now you have declared this channel here, but we also have to create a channel in. If you go back to your file explorer here, you notice that in the routes there's a file called channels that we haven't touched yet. So in here we're gonna create another like gate or a channel that we're gonna use for our chat system. So here just type broadcast. All right, then here write channel. In here I'm gonna type some inverted commas there. Type chat dot, open some curly brackets. In here type receiver. Right after the receiver, outside the bracket write a comma. A type of function, then some open brackets there. In here the function that is like a convention, is always going to receive the current logged in user as a first argument. So don't make a mistake of putting another parameter here as a first argument. No, it has to be the current logged in user is always the first argument. Next we're going to pass this same name here as a receiver, so just type there receiver. Right, next let's right after the brackets add some curly brackets there and then close it down with a semicolon. So now we can now use this two information in our logic here. So now let's determine, let me actually comment this. Right, so here let us do return int this user ID is equals to, make them 3, int receiver. Right, so you're going to pass an ID. This is going to be a model of the current logged in user, like that. So I'm going to get the user ID from here. Make sure you close it down with a semicolon. I'm going to get the user ID of the current logged in user, which is this one, and then I'm going to compare it to the user ID that we just sent on our dispatched event there. So let's also trigger this now event by going to the send message component here, and then right after sending the message we're going to broadcast an event here. So in here we're going to create, we're going to emit an event after the body, this emit self, and then I'm going to say dispatch message sent. Right, now I'm going to listen for this one in the same class here. So create listeners here, dispatch message sent. All right, so now let's also create this function now, function dispatch message sent. And we're not going to receive any parameters. We're going to use this function to now broadcast our event. So now let's just write this broadcast new message sent. It's going to also come here, like it's going to also show up here. So make sure I click enter so we can inject it in our at the top here, this one, message sent events. All right, next in here we're going to add a few parameters that we passed here. If you go to our message sent, we have this one called user. First is a user, so I'm going to pass the user model first. Auth, the authenticated user. All right, next parameter, this, let's get created message. If you can see, we created a message here, this one, created message. We're going to pass this created message to our broadcast event, created message. All right, next, selected let's see, we're going to pass a selected conversation. Yeah, this one, selected conversation, and then last, comma, receiver instance. Is it there? The receiver instance here. Yes, this one is already declared. So everything that is going to be passed here has already been declared. So we're just gonna pass these parameters in here, and then in the end just add a semicolon there to cover this error. So please make sure here it's this receiver instance. All right, so now to test this, we're going to, back in our message sent here, we're just going to make an error log of, let's say, this user ID. Okay, and then we have this user ID, add the semicolon there. Let's also add another one. Let's call this one error log. This receiver, let's also pass the whole model to our PHP. Let's see receiver. We're gonna pass this whole model instance to our PHP, and we can also pass the user here, this user, this one here, user and receiver. Let's see what is gonna appear. And you open the terminal. Make sure you open the terminal where the server is currently running. You have all this bash. We may have different on your system, but just choose the one where you run the PHP artisan server. So let's go back to our browser and try to click send, and we have an error. Message component, message not found in the component. Okay, so in here in the send message, we forgot to make this available to all other functions. Here, just type this in front of that and add a hyphen and point it to that. Also here add this, and on this one too, this, and also at the top here just add another public void created message. Make sure it's the same as these ones. And this actually reminds me, here I noticed that there's something fishy going on the update component. It's like we are updating a wrong kind of user. I don't know, but if you check the chat list, here you notice that here it's receiver instance. We didn't make this available to all other functions because it might collide with this one. But when passing the receiver here, we're kind of pulling the wrong one. So here we're supposed to remove this one. Just remove this. I'm sure this error has been going on for a while, but it didn't really impact our data flow. But it's good that we notice it right now because it will make our chat work better. So after taking care of that, if we go back to our let's just refresh the browser. Now let's see if we're gonna send the message to the right user. Hello. So here, so now if you can see, the user is game, and we're sending the message to cake. So it's now sending the message to the right user like that because we're pulling in the right user. So yeah, so for now this is all for this video. We're now able to send our message, cast our message when we click send here. We're broadcasting our message with some details that we choose. In the next video, we're going to focus on displaying the message on the other user's screen. So see you in the next video.